Hey everybody, welcome back to Library Says. My name is Jamie, and today I'm wrapping up all of the books that I read in October. I read 15 different books over the course of the month, and I had a lot of really excellent reads and some not as excellent reads, but they're sort of all over the place as far as genre goes. So it was sort of an interesting month, and let's get started. I started out reading nonfiction in October. This book is Antiracist by Tiffany Jewell. This is a book geared for younger teens, and it covers racism, institutional racism, broken down into sort of bite-sized lessons with activities and sort of actionable items for them to not just read, but to walk away with something they can do. I read this because I am a teen librarian. I work with 6th through 12th grade primarily, and doing reader's advisory and reference and working with teachers, mostly at a middle school. So this book was right up my alley, and definitely something I want to include in my reader's advisory. I've included it in anti-racism displays that I've done at the library, and I just really enjoyed it. It has great illustrations. It's very colorful. It doesn't dumb anything down, but it definitely puts it on a level that my kids, the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th graders, will really understand. And I learned a lot from it too. And I just thought it was great. I thought it was great, and it was perfectly done for that age group, and I gave it 4 stars. Then I swung over in a different direction, and I read Head Over Heels by Hannah Orenstein. This is sort of touted as a romance, and there is a romance in it, but I would not call it a romance novel at all. It's about a woman who was a competitive gymnast for many years and was an Olympic hopeful, but during the Olympic trials was injured, and it ended her gymnastics career. And she has sort of spiraled off a cliff, honestly, ever since. So when her boyfriend breaks up with her because she has no ambition and she's kind of wasting her life, it's sort of a kick in the butt, and it sends her back to her hometown and taking a job coaching an up-and-coming gymnast, much like she was several years ago, which is very hard for her. She is also co-coaching with a man who was also a competitive gymnast that she worked with back in the day when they were teenagers, and she thought he was cute, and now they're working together. This book does have the romance, like I said, but if you're going in just for the romance, you're probably going to be disappointed. My favorite part of this book was the relationship between our main character and the young gymnast she's coaching, and the main character's realization that just because her dreams didn't turn out the way she wanted doesn't mean her life's over, and doesn't mean she can't have new and different dreams. And her coming to terms with her self-worth even after losing so much. This one wasn't perfect for me. There were a lot of different plot lines that were thrown in. An ex-best friend who she reunites with, who's in an abusive relationship with their former coach, an inclusion of a athletic doctor who we learn has been sexually assaulting his female gymnast patients. You know, a storyline ripped straight from the actual headlines. Any of these storylines could have been fleshed out into its own story, and instead felt a little all over the place. None of them were quite given the weight they deserved, and it distracted from the primary story this novel was clearly trying to tell. So I did enjoy it a lot. I think it could have been edited down a bit further and had some of these plot lines maybe dropped or just dropped altogether, but I did enjoy it, and I gave it 4 stars. Then I read a YA thriller, One of Us is Next by Karen M. McManus. This is the sequel to One of Us is Lying, and it's definitely a very similar story, a similar spin on a YA thriller, and the way this one goes down is the younger sister of one of the characters from the first book is involved in a game that is happening of truth or dare via texts from an anonymous game runner, and if you take the dare, awesome. If you don't, then a truth about you is outed to the whole school, and this ruins a lot of lives. We know that someone involved has died, and then we jump back to the beginning and work our way forward. So trying to figure out how the person died, how all of our main players are connected, and who this anonymous game runner is. I was sort of disappointed with this one. I really loved One of Us is Lying, and this one felt like a watered down knockoff. I guessed almost everything really early on, which I found really disappointing. And then there's a twist in the literal last second, like the last page of the book that's supposed to like turn things on its head. And for me, it just felt so forced and unbelievable, and it just made me roll my eyes, which was unfortunate because I did love One of Us is Lying so much. But for this one, I did have to give it 3 stars. Then I read another YA thriller that was just the greatest. A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson. This is a debut, it's the first in a series, and it's about a girl named Pippa who, for her senior year project, decides to reinvestigate a murder that happened, I think, 2 years earlier at her high school. A popular girl was killed, and then her boyfriend was found dead, supposedly by suicide, with a text or a note, something like that, which basically he admits to having been the murderer. Open and shut. Case solved. Except Pippa doesn't believe it. So she's decided to start from the beginning and reinvestigate the whole thing. If you're going to read this one and you're an audiobook fan at all, I highly recommend you do it via audio because there are narrators for different characters. All of the different audio recordings of her different interviews and everything are done with different voices, so it feels like you're listening to actual recordings, actual interviews, actual news stories, like a podcast. So if you're into true crime podcasts at all, I guarantee you'll love the audiobook of this. I never figured anything out. As soon as I thought I had something figured out, I was just proved completely wrong. We'd go in a different direction, twist after twist after twist. I just had a blast. I read this in one day. I could not put it down. It's like the only thing I did for 24 hours. And then I immediately made my best friend and my sister both read it too, and they both loved it. Just A+. A+, I gave it 5 stars. Then I read a YA fantasy, Return of the Thief by Megan Whalen Turner. This is the 6th and final book in the Queen's Thief series, and it's about Eugenides, who started out his story as a thief. And honestly, I don't want to tell you anything more than that. If you haven't read this series, I highly recommend you start at the beginning. The first one's called The Thief, and work your way through the whole series. It's so worth it. The payoff, it's bittersweet and beautiful and just perfectly right, like pitch perfect for the series. It was the perfect conclusion. And considering she's been writing the series for over 20 years, it has been a long awaited conclusion to the series. But if you haven't read them, now's the perfect time because it's finished, finally. It's just great. I gave this 5 stars. And then I went in a different direction yet again and read an adult Amish thriller. It's called Outsider by Linda Castillo. This is the 12th book in a series. I have not read any of the others. I don't know what possessed me to pick this up, but it snagged my attention, so I went for it and I really enjoyed it, so I'll probably go back and read more from the series. But this follows a woman named Kate Burkholder who was raised Amish and then has something really terrible happen to her when she's a teenager, which completely wrecks her belief system and the foundation she has with her family and her faith. And so when she's an older teenager, she decides to leave. She runs away, becomes a waitress, ends up joining the police force. Now, many years later, she's the chief of police in the town where she grew up. So she speaks the language, she's very familiar with the culture, she has friends and family in the community, but she's separate, obviously, now as the chief of police, and she works primarily with the Amish and the community around the Amish, solving crimes. This time, she has a woman from her past, a former partner of hers, shows up on the lam. She's been accused of all sorts of crimes, and she says she's being framed. And Kate has to decide, does she trust her? Does she take her in and help her? Or should she call the police and say, I found her, do I turn her in, what do we do? And the Amish get involved. I loved it. It was great. I haven't read anything like it. It was really an interesting take on a crime thriller, and I had a lot of fun, and I gave this one 4 stars. Then I read a YA mystery thriller, The Inheritance Games by Jennifer Lynn Barnes, based on the synopsis. I thought this book was going to be a sort of older, more modern Westing game about a girl whose parents are dead, who lives with her older sister and doesn't have a lot going for her, except that she's very, very smart. And then a billionaire who she has no connection to dies and leaves everything to her, inexplicably. The only catch is that she has to move into his house where all the rest of his family, who have just been snubbed, live, and stay there for 1 year before she's allowed to inherit. There were supposed to be riddles and games and mysteries to solve and backstabbing from the family, and it just wasn't. It was a letdown. It was very bland and dull. And there are 2 brothers who were sort of the love interests, the potential love interests, and I found them nearly identical, like indistinguishable. So when the tension comes to a head with one of them, I was completely apathetic because I couldn't even remember what I was supposed to know about him and what was his attributes, what did we know about him versus his brother, just the characterization, not good. And then we get to the end and the reveal, but there's no reveal. We get no information. Nothing is wrapped up. We just get more questions. End scene. Oh, by the way, there's going to be a sequel. And it felt like a cash grab, and there was not enough plot there to justify a sequel. And I'm really disappointed with it. Really disappointed with it. And I gave it 2 stars. I will not be continuing the series. Then I read another thriller, lots of thrillers, but kind of different types of thrillers all over the board. But this one is called Devolution by Max Brooks. This is the author of World War Z, which I have not read, but I know was wildly popular and also has a movie, which I've not seen. And it is written like true crime, except of course it's fictional, but it is about the Mount Rainier Sasquatch disaster. And we follow through various formats, a journal, news clips, interviews with experts, a massacre that occurred, and it's the author's supposition that it was caused by Sasquatches in the wake of the Mount Rainier erupting. So, volcano erupts, which sends the Sasquatch down lower, and they stumble across an eco-community that's sort of isolated and now, because of the eruption, completely closed off from the rest of the world, and they're starving, and they don't have any communication with anyone else, and now Sasquatches are attacking them. And that's basically the whole story. The problem is, I wanted it to be bigger, I wanted it to be more, and the main character we're following through her journal was just like the least interesting part of the whole book. She was sort of weak and whiny, and by the end, she becomes like this super warrior, and I just didn't really buy it. The evolution of that character wasn't really there for me. So I did enjoy it because I thought it was such a cool idea, and it was well done, but the story itself was sort of so I did give this one 3 stars. Then I read 2 romance novel e-arcs I got from NetGalley, and it was a blast. The first one is Second First Impressions by Sally Thorne. Sally Thorne, of course, is the author of The Hating Game, my favorite romance novel possibly of all time. I did not, however, like her second book at all. So this third book I was super nervous going into, but whew, much better. Still not amazing. There were some issues, but it was quirky and fun. I thought the storyline was really enjoyable, and there were a lot of different elements that were wound in that I thought were done really well. And I really liked all of the characters. There was a surprise at the end that I didn't see coming, but I probably should have, but totally caught me off guard in the best way. Honestly, the only thing for me that was sort of weak was the romance itself. It didn't feel quite that believable or well developed. It felt like Sally Thorne said these 2 people should fall in love, and so they were in love. And I'm like, do I buy it? I don't know. But it didn't really matter that much because I had a good time, and I did end up giving this one 4 stars. Then I read People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry. I read her other book, Beach Read, earlier this year and gave it 5 stars, and then I turned around and gave this one 5 stars. She's a new auto-buy author. Her adult fiction/romances, A+. People We Meet on Vacation follows 2 best friends, a man and a woman. What we know in present day is that they haven't spoken in several years since something happened while they were on vacation together years ago. Then they get reunited in present, and we jump back to the beginning, how they met and how they started vacationing together, and over the years, the evolution of their friendship leading up to the event that ended things. Then we're moving on in present day from their reunion on, and can they rebuild things, and what is that going to look like? I was worried initially because the jumping back and forth between the 2 timelines thing, I was worried I just wouldn't care about the past, and I just wanted to get back to the present and see how things were going to end up, but it was so worth the wait. It's so important to their story that you follow the whole way through, and the payoff is worth it, I promise. I loved it, and I've been telling everyone I know about it. It also doesn't come out until next year, but it is so worth the wait. Highly recommended, 5 stars. Then yet again, a swerve, and I read 2 indie dark romances by the author Runix, and that's The Predator and The Reaper. These both came out in 2020, and they are the first 2 of a 5-book series. The third one comes out in December. I read the first one of these when it was fan fiction many years ago, when I was obsessed with the characters in this fandom. It has since been changed. It is original fiction. The names have been changed. Plenty of stuff has changed from the original fic version. So I thought I'd go in, give it a try, and I had a great time. The characters are so compelling. The chemistry is on fire. I wanted to know how things were going to go down. I will say it's not perfect. It really needs a professional editor, like desperately. There's a lot of repetitive sentences and phrases. There's awkward wording, just some stuff that's not the best written. She has what it takes to write a compelling romance and a compelling thriller. She just needs some professional eyes on her work before it gets published. But it is indie published. I still really had a great time, so it is what it is. So what is the story of this? It is about a woman who is the daughter of a mob boss. She is also a coder. She creates codes that would be dangerous for anybody if they get into the wrong hands. And they get stolen by a man who works for a rival mob organization. And she breaks into his home to try and get them back, and that sends them on this whole quest. Danger, forced cohabitation, rivals to romance, just good stuff, good stuff. I gave both the first and second book in the series 4 stars. Then, on the strong recommendation from 2 different coworkers of mine, I read A Hunger Like No Other by Cressley Cole. This is the first in the Immortals After Dark series, which follows werewolves and vampires and Valkyries and Fae and all sorts of different creatures. This one is about a werewolf, a Lycae, I think is what they're called, who has been held captive by evil vampires for like 200 years. When he one day it smells his fated mate, which gives him the strength to break free, and he pops out on the streets of modern day Paris, very quickly acclimates with cars and technology and whatever, even though he's been underground for 200 years, kidnaps his mate. There are a lot of problems with this. Problems with consent, problems with all sorts of stuff. Very problematic. Was it fun? Parts of it were fun. I did enjoy the wider world, and I would be interested to see if further books in the series do a better job building the rest of the world. I didn't love these characters. I didn't love their relationship because it started so rockily, but I would give other books in this series a go. This one's older, so I think the further you get down the series, maybe the better the relationship elements would be handled. I don't know. Like I said, 2 of my coworkers really love this series, and I trust them, so I trust that there's good to come. So I might pick up other books in the series one day, but I did give this one 2 stars. Then I read another indie published book that I got on Kindle Unlimited, 10,000 Points of Light by Michelle Warren. This is my first book by Michelle Warren. It's about a woman who had something bad happen to her several years ago that led to memory loss. She has no memory of anything that happened prior to that event. So we pick up with her in present day. She is a real estate agent, and she lives in this apartment, and she has this sort of rocky relationship with the landlord or the super of the building. It sort of follows their relationship. And then we get some information about 3/4 of the way into the book. We jump back to prior to the event, and her story before it happened, leading up to it, what actually happened, and then can we move forward. I thought there would be more to this than there was. I thought it would be more focused on our main character coming to terms with herself and her memories and what has happened to her. And really, it's a romance. It's just a romance, and it wasn't a romance that I was all in about. I don't really even know what to say about it, except that I was just sort of disappointed. I found it sort of lackluster, and when it was all said and done, I thought, okay, that was fine, moving on. So I did give it 3 stars. It was fine. Sorry, it's not a great review. But then I read the last book of October, which was The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. One of my favorite books I've read this year. I am not a V.E. Schwab fan, usually. I have been pretty disappointed by most of her books. I did not know what to think going into this. I've heard a lot of people say that it's so different from her other stuff that probably V.E. Schwab fans are going to be disappointed, and maybe that's true, but like I said, not a V.E. Schwab fan, really, so I had no expectations. This book follows Addie, who is born in the 1690s, and in the early 1700s is about to be married off, even though she doesn't want to. She bargains with a god who answers after dark, basically the darkness. She asks the darkness for freedom, and the darkness answers. Of course, it's not all that simple. Addie's basically been cursed. She will be forgotten by everyone she meets. So she wakes up the next morning, her family doesn't know she exists, her village has never heard of her, and anytime she interacts with someone, as soon as she leaves their sight, it's like it never happened. So we follow her over the course of the centuries, and bouncing back and forth between that, her story, and present day, which is 2014, in New York City, when she meets a boy who remembers her. There's not a lot of action. It's not a plot-heavy book. It is characters and descriptions, and it is emotional and beautiful, and I was just sort of wrecked by it. When I finished it, I had to put it down and walk away, and I didn't know that I could ever read a book again without it being negatively influenced by how much I had loved Addie LaRue. I just kind of want to read it again. I've been telling everyone I know about it, and I just loved it. So if you're on the fence about whether or not you should give it a go, if any of that sounds good to you, I'd highly recommend you pick it up. I did give it 5 stars. So that's it. Those are the 15 books that I read in October. I had a great reading month. It was a lot of fun. It was all over the place. But it was a good time. Let me know down below what your favorite books you read in October were, or if you've read any of the books I read this month, what did you think? You agree with me? Disagree with me? Let me know. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Bye.